In the early 90s, the global video game market had an absolute owner. Nintendo didn't just lead the industry, they dictated every rule. Controlling the vast majority of the market, the Japanese company was ruthless with software developers. If a studio wanted to release a game, they had to buy physical cartridges directly from Nintendo, pay licensing fees up front, and accept razor-thin profit margins. It was a massive money-printing machine. The Super Nintendo console was at the peak of its popularity, and competition could barely find breathing room on store shelves. However, absolute success has a common side effect in the corporate world. It generates a false sense of invincibility. This arrogance set the stage for what is now considered one of the greatest strategic blunders in the history of business. It was a miscalculation that not only cost Nintendo their market leadership, but created their ultimate financial nightmare. This is a historical lesson about business models, contracts, and the incredibly high price of breaking an agreement in public. To understand the corporate root of this conflict, we need to look at the technological limitations of that era. Cartridges were extremely expensive to mass produce and offered tiny data storage. While developers dreamed of orchestrated soundtracks and complex 3D graphics, physical cartridges blocked major creative advancement. The tech industry knew the next big step, the CD-ROM. The disc format offered hundreds of times more storage for a microscopic fraction of the production cost. Sega, Nintendo's main rival, was already investing heavily in a proprietary CD reader. Nintendo's board knew they couldn't fall behind, but they lacked the internal expertise to engineer advanced optical hardware. They urgently needed a strong technological partner. That is exactly how Kyoto executives ended up knocking on the door of a global electronics giant with no strategic interest in video games: Sony. A visionary engineer named Ken Kutaragi had already worked with Nintendo, designing the Super Nintendo's sound chip in secret. Kutaragi used this success to convince Sony's upper management to deepen this corporate alliance. On paper, the commercial agreement seemed perfect for both sides. Sony would manufacture an innovative peripheral for the Super Nintendo to read CD games. The internal project was dubbed the PlayStation. Alongside the peripheral, Sony would develop an independent hybrid console running both Nintendo cartridges and new CD games. Hardware development moved fast. Sony allocated millions in research, certain they were entering a highly lucrative market. However, Nintendo's executives made a severe strategic error signing the original contract in 1988. When Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo's feared president, reviewed the document years later, he found a fatal commercial clause. The contract transferred to Sony total control over the licensing and distribution of all CD games. In practical business terms, Nintendo would only profit from traditional cartridges, while Sony collected royalties from every disc released. For a company whose profit model relied strictly on software licensing, this was commercially unacceptable. Yamauchi realized he had handed over the keys to the vault. He needed to void the agreement immediately. Instead of sitting at the negotiating table to rework terms, Yamauchi opted for a drastic, silent tactical maneuver. He sent his top executives to Europe with a clear objective: secure a backstage deal with Philips to create an alternative CD reader. This new contract kept absolute control of profits firmly in Nintendo's hands. Fast forward to June 1991, during the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, the most important tech event globally. On the first day, Sony proudly stepped onto the main stage to announce the PlayStation, completely compatible with Nintendo's system. The announcement made an immediate impact, and the press applauded the innovation. Yet, the celebratory mood lasted exactly 24 hours. The very next day, at the same trade show, Nintendo called its own press conference. Executive Howard Lincoln announced to the global market that Nintendo was developing its new CD reader in partnership with Philips. The crucial detail? They hadn't sent a prior warning to Sony. Norio Oga, Sony's president, discovered the breach of contract reading urgent news reports. The action was a cold, calculated, and deeply public humiliation. The immediate corporate response inside Sony was absolute shock, rapidly replaced by unrelenting institutional fury. In Japanese business, preserving honor and public respect are the foundational pillars of any commercial relationship. The unilateral cancellation, broadcast live to the Western tech market, crossed the line of a simple business decision. It became a direct insult to Norio Oga's leadership. The first instinct from the board was to order a complete withdrawal from gaming and prepare a massive lawsuit. The corporation had burned millions on hardware that now seemed useless. But engineer Ken Kutaragi viewed the scenario differently. He proposed an audacious alternative: absorb the technology, scrap compatibility with Nintendo, and build completely independent hardware. A machine focused heavily on 3D processing and based exclusively on low-cost CDs. Oga, driven by a desire to expose Nintendo's failure, signed the approval against conservative advice. Oga's directive was simple and brutal: execute whatever is necessary to bring down Nintendo's empire. Sony's team executed their attack plan with surgical precision. As financial strategists, they knew powerful hardware doesn't generate revenue without massive software sales. Utilizing their vast commercial experience in the music industry, Sony actively approached major game developers who were exhausted by Nintendo's abusive policies and exorbitant fees. Sony's offer was impossible to refuse: generous licensing contracts, CDs that cost pennies to press, and total creative freedom. Global heavyweight studios like Squaresoft, creator of the highly lucrative Final Fantasy franchise, severed ties with Nintendo and migrated exclusively to Sony's platform. When this new generation reached retail shelves, the result was a commercial massacre. The PlayStation dominated the global market from end to end. Sony sold a staggering 102 million units of its first console, while Nintendo managed roughly 32 million units of the Nintendo 64. The financial irony is undeniable. In a desperate attempt to protect its monopoly, Nintendo made a short-term executive decision that provided the exact fuel needed to create the corporation that dethroned them. If Yamauchi had opted for amicable renegotiation, the PlayStation brand would likely be Nintendo property. The tech sector learned a harsh financial lesson in 1991. In business, blind arrogance always hands you the bill, and your greatest ally today can easily become your executioner tomorrow.